with Rob from Infinifi. Who are you and what is your background?
I'm the CEO and co-founder of Infinifi. I have been in the DeFi space for 4 years now professionally, and I went from a $100 investment to about $90,000, which was triple my annual salary pretty much overnight. And I realized,
How have you approached product market fit here?
the general concept is some sort of a disintermediation between the high risks of DeFi and the low risk thresholds that the traditional financial world seems to prefer. So Infinifi bridges that gap perfectly. And
Excellent. Good morning. This is actually the first podcast we're recording in Korea, but we're recording it online from my hotel room with Rob from Infinifi. Really actually an interesting time to record it because Infinifi addresses some of the points that Vitalik chatted about in his article, which came out, I think, yesterday, depending on where you are in the world. And that's actually what I wanted to ask you about first is, well, first of all, what are your takes on that article? And then if you could tie it into what you guys are doing at Infinifi a little bit, that would be great.
yeah, so just from the idea of Vitalik finally coming around and talking about DeFi, I think that is fantastic. We are finally getting the attention that we are due from the EF. It's been a long year of slowly, subtly, and sometimes brazenly shoving them in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
But it is truly wonderful to see him finally acknowledging the importance that this industry has to the overall health of Ethereum. So that's just my initial gut take. Now, as a general thesis, as I understand it, and I only read partway, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but the general concept that Vitalik is advocating for is some sort of a disintermediation between the high risks of DeFi and the more low risk thresholds that the traditional financial world seems to prefer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's more or less my read of it as well.
Yeah. So Infinifi bridges that gap perfectly. And we bridge that gap in ways that others touch at but don't quite manage to attain. And for that reason, I find it very interesting because it is precisely the sort of low risk DeFi play that Vitalik is speaking directly about. With some, you have, a less direct way of expressing your interest in DeFi, such as lending protocols, where you're lending against the asset rather than directly deploying capital into it. But I personally think that unless it's done as a cross-margin system, the same way that Aave is set up, that isolated margin, unless you have, again, a pool of assets in that isolated, which kind of devalues the term isolated margin in the first place. But unless you're doing it so you're spreading your risk out across a bunch of different assets, you end up with a very similar problem where you're facing probably just one counterparty. And in facing that one counterparty, you were taking on all the risk that is in that asset as if you were directly depositing into the asset itself. What we offer that I think makes us so appealing is not only are you getting exposure to a broad variety of assets just by default, since we're deploying your money out to a wide variety of different places, Aave, Pendle, Athena, few others. If I sat here and tried to list them, it would take me probably a minute or two. But also, you're getting, if you come in through our senior tranche, insurance. And what I mean by that is that our senior tranche is the second loss tranche in our protocol. It loses money only after the first loss tranche, the junior tranche, has lost every single dollar that's deposited in there. And we compensate people for this. If you deposit to our junior tranche, you're going to be getting between 14 and 16% APY.
Mm-hmm.
And
let me interrupt you here. Let's back up a little bit before we get into some of the details around, the exact mechanics and tranches in your protocol. I'd like to back up to a little more background. So first of all, who are you and what is your background?
So yeah, I'm Rob. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Infinifi. I have been in the DeFi space for 4 years now professionally. And I've been in crypto as a hobbyist since 2013. Got into it from all things Minecraft. Found out about it on a it was it's an anarchy Minecraft server I used to play on back in the day, and I heard about this thing called Bitcoin on it. It wasn't 2B2T. Everyone thinks it's 2B2T. It was Civcraft, and it was really interesting to me. It was like, oh wow, that definitely speaks to my libertarian spirit. How do I get involved in this? Turned out it was Mount Gox. Went out, bought 2 Bitcoin, and spent one on a fake. The other one, unfortunately, went down with the ship. Still trying to get that back, but I managed to get in, and I stuck around. And in 2021, I was doing a doctorate in nanothermal engineering, mechanical more specifically, thermal even more specifically, and drill down into it. I was working on chipsets and heat spreaders, and I was terribly bored. This was Georgia Tech. It's great school, great place, very interesting field. But unfortunately, if you want to do anything like truly wild in it, you need about $100 million just to start a company, or to go the academia route, which I did not want to do. And so, as I was, in this place, I'm like, wow, I really don't see a future here. I was also getting married, and I realized, okay, I need to find a way to make some money. So I got back into crypto. Um, it was I initially tried the GameStop thing, but it's horribly corrupt. It's like, okay, back to crypto. So I started a validator on some chain called Unification. No one's ever heard of it, but it was quite interesting. Had a really good payoff structure, and I quickly became the number one validator on the chain. Went from $100 initial investment to making, few $1,000s a week. And then suddenly, probably because the founder of that chain had some pretty significant connections to Ryoshi, the founder of Sheeb, it blew up to $10,000 a token. And I had a decent amount of those. So I went from $100 investment to about $90,000, which was triple my annual salary, pretty much overnight.
Mm-hmm.
I realized, oh wow, there actually is something to this whole game, isn't there? I can build products here. I can build projects, and I just kind of got hooked from there. Taught myself Solidity, launched an NFT, started my first company, Revest, launched that in September 21. We went with that through the ins and outs, the ups and downs, whole lot of trials and tribulations. And in early 24, we were pretty much reaching the end of that project. And I started striking around to see, okay, how can I solve some of the problems that we found while we were trying to find this product market fit. And I stumbled upon the idea for Infinifi. And I realized, oh, okay, this actually increases everyone's rate of return, what I've just found by accident. I was trying to solve a problem for a client.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted us to make illiquid yields more liquid. And so when I tried to solve it, I almost by accident was playing around with the spreadsheet, playing around with the tranche system and a reserve, and suddenly everyone was making more money. And I don't realize why everyone's making more money. It turned out that I had stumbled upon a first principles approach to banking in a way that had never been done probably since 1,000 years ago, because no one tries to reinvent banking. It works fine for TradFi, but I'd stumbled upon a blockchain native based solution for it. And it increased everyone's rate of return. Once I realized what I had, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is really big. I need to go do something with this. So we went out, we raised, we built it. That brings us to today.
So now we can get back in kind of the financial mechanics of this primitive. Take us through it from the highest possible level, the most accessible level of exactly how this kind of new primitive system or primitive/system works.
Yeah. So it's a fairly straightforward system. There's really only two types of deposits. There's liquid deposits and locked deposits. And you can think of those as our senior and our junior tranche. Senior is liquid, junior is locked. And if you come in and you deposit USDC to the system on the liquid side, well, what we do is we take that and we deploy 75% of that capital to duration assets, things like Pendle and Athena. And normal lending mechanisms like Aave or Morpho, they're going to make 6-7% usually, and that's the average of the two. Aave makes 8, Aave makes 4, Morpho makes 8. You average it out, you're around 6. But if you deploy directly into the Pendle PTs or into Athena itself, you're making anywhere from around 8 to about even 18, 19, 20 on some of the riskier PTs out there. And that's a much higher rate of return. So if you take a bunch of capital that typically only expects to be making, say, 4 or 5%, you put 75% of that capital into something that's making, 14, 15%, suddenly there's a marginal return. And how do we route that? Well, what we do next is we use the duration depositors who are also depositing USDC. They tell us, hey, I'm willing to wait, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get my money back from when I asked for it. And I'm also willing to take the higher risk that if anything goes wrong in the underlying assets, I'm going to lose all of my money before the other guy loses a cent. So they're taking on that duration risk and that first loss risk. And they choose their duration. And based on the duration they choose, we figure out, okay, X percent of people want 1 week liquidity, Y percent of people want 2 week liquidity, and so on. And from that, we can form what's called a ladder portfolio, which tells us how much money we should be putting into each of these different buckets. More granularly, these users vote on where they want that capital to be distributed from a list that we, the team, curate. Someday that will be decentralized. But for now, that curation is very much a tragedy of the commons if you let it out into the wild. And okay, so now we know where to put the capital. We take that 75% we got from the other users, we put it in there, and like I said, we're putting more money total, the liquid, 75% of the liquid money and 100% of the illiquid money into these duration assets. And we end up with more money than we would have had we put liquid with liquid and illiquid with illiquid. And because we have fundamentally more money, we can distribute it such that our liquid guys, they're not going to make as much as their money actually earned. They're going to make slightly less, but they're going to make a lot more than if they put it into Aave or Morpho. Mm-hmm. And that's the trick for them, is they're making a better return than they would have gotten being liquid elsewhere. So they're still happy. That extra that we don't pay them that their money made, we give that to our duration depositors. So they're making more than they would have made in the corresponding PT or Athena asset. And so they're happy too. Everyone ends up making more money than they otherwise would have made, which is a situation in which everyone wins. And that's been great. People really seem to love it. We're sitting at 123 million right now.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
But from kind of like a surface level, it feels unintuitive. It's like how am I creating a system in which both parties can make more money? It doesn't make very much sense. Would you characterize this as like a new financial primitive? Would you, or is it due to kind of math, or is it due to market inefficiency? Or is it kind of like a new thing, like maybe a marketplace or something where we're allowing people to align their interests in different ways that achieves kind of a positive externality?
Yeah, I'd characterize it as improved efficiency. I would say it's a new financial primitive for DeFi. The concept is definitely not new. It's called borrow short, lend long. It is exactly what banking systems do, where you give your money to a banking system and they lend it out to somebody for, a week, 2 weeks, a year. And if everyone tries to get their money out at once, well, the money's been lent out. So that's what Infinifi is doing. And because people are willing to pay more money if, there's a duration associated, a longer duration, well, we generate a higher return. So intuitively, does that make a bit more sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's funny that I didn't, I'm a midwit podcaster, so I don't necessarily put these things together, but it does make sense. It's really one of these parties is operating at a bank expecting to get fixed returns over fixed durations, and the other party, the depositor, it's acting like a checking account or a savings account or something where they anticipate their money to be liquid at any given time.
And that's the efficiency improvement here, is that the money isn't fully liquid. Right? If everyone tries to withdraw at once, well, there's not enough money in the reserves. It's been lent out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
for that, 10, 20, 30-day duration. And those are PTs that, it's not being lent out. We're just putting it into PTs, but you can think of it
Right.
as lending. Um, and since it's, in those PTs, it's not really liquid. The same way that ST ETH isn't really liquid. ST ETH is only as liquid as the redemption queue is. If you need money and the redemption queue is full, you sell in the secondary. Same way
Mm-hmm.
with Infinifi. If everyone tries to withdraw at once, it is like a bank, and that there's a bank run. Um,
Right.
we manage that. We manage that very well because AMMs exist, and you can, just like ST ETH, you can sell your right to withdraw into an AMM, and you get whatever people are willing to pay for it right now, and people who are willing to pay for it, well, they're buying $1 in like a week or two for less than $1.
Mm-hmm. And really, it's much preferable to like a banking system. Well, first of all, I imagine the yields are much more impressive, um, but we've seen that across DeFi previously. But then the other side is that you have this kind of access to this constant marketplace of assets that are being buying and sold across DeFi constantly, where a bank is kind of manually doing this or doesn't properly manage duration risk, and that's what causes these kind of bank runs in TradFi systems.
Well, yeah, we're able to directly measure user sentiment with, our duration depositors. They're telling us, hey, we're
Mm,
willing to wait 3 weeks, we're willing to wait 1 week. And we get a very good sample of what people actually want, which informs us how we should be deploying the capital. Now, the real efficiency unlock here is like if you are at a bank, right, and there's a bank run, you have a right to your bank account, but you can't find anybody to buy it because it's not very fungible.
mm-hmm.
The unlock that DeFi brings to the table is that the rights to redeem one IUSD for one USDC. That's an ERC20. You can just sell that on an AMM, and so you
Right.
end up with a really efficient pricing of what people think that's worth, which allows us to not need the government to step in. It allows private markets to step in, and you don't need the FDIC showing up and socializing the losses to the taxpayer while they're
Mm-hmm.
selling the assets on the bank's balance sheet out the back door to JP Morgan.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting concept. So what are some of the risks associated with this system, and are they risks that are present in kind of the TradFi banking system?
So the primary one, like I said, it's a bank run. Worst case scenario there, if you need the money immediately, you just go sell it on the secondary. Same thing you're seeing with ST ETH right now, where everyone's trying to get their Ethereum back, and they're just having to wait in the queue. The price of ST ETH is depegged, and there's a lot of arbitrageurs who know it's going to take 30 days to get out and are willing to buy ST ETH at like 97% of its actual value, because in 30 days they're going to be able to flip that right into some free ETH. That's the main risk there for the senior tranche, the one that has the insurance on it. And I say
Right.
insurance because it's actually technically safer than depositing directly into Aave or Morpho, since you are getting that additional smart contract risk, but you also are getting the junior tranche who will be fully, liquidated basically in the event of an exploit before you take a cent of loss. And there is $57 million there that will lose everything before you, as someone in SIUSD, lose a penny. So that leads very nicely into the other risk, and that's for the duration depositors, our junior tranche. They lose every cent before the guys in the senior tranche see a cent of loss. And
Mm-hmm.
that means they have concentration risk, right? They're earning with we're at 123 million. They're basically earning with $63 million, $66 million of capital that's not their own. And
Right.
so they basically, if you had like a loss on Pendle that normally for them they would have only lost 10% of their money because some random PT went under, well, now they're going to lose 20%. So it's a form of concentration,
Mm-hmm.
but
Um,
that's the risk.
how have you approached kind of product market fit here? Do you think it's compelling to users just because like, oh, high yield, or do you think there's other reasons why it's compelling to users?
I think there's a few other reasons. High yield is definitely nice. People like high yield. But let's start with the junior tranche. The one that I've gotten the most that people absolutely adore is the auto rollover on PTs.
Mm-hmm.
People really do not like having to deal with rolling their PTs over week
Right.
after week, time after time. They don't want to pay somebody else to do it for them because that's just ridiculous. Why would I take less yield? I can just do the auto rollover myself. It's not that
Mm.
bad. But if you offer them, more yield and auto rollover, yeah, they love it. They go crazy for that.
So it's a way to both productize and kind of optimize the yield someone would be earning who's already kind of playing these like DeFi strategy games.
Yeah, and we crowdsource that optimization. Exactly.
Hmm. You talked about product market fit with your last company, and kind of the odyssey of finding that. How do you feel? You guys have about 123 million in deposits right now. How do you feel about kind of your journey right now through product market fit and where you guys sit today?
I feel like we have product market fit. We got
Hmm.
to continue to push on distribution. That's like the biggest impediment to growth once you have PMF is greater distribution. But pretty much every single time I get this product in front of somebody, they're like, "Oh, wow, that's really cool. How can I give you money?"
Hmm.
It's never one of those things where it's like, "Oh, this doesn't fit my needs." It's one of those things where it's like, "Wow, this is I've been looking for something like this." So we had a much easier time this time around. I am now getting to learn about the next layer, the next level up, I guess, of running a startup, which is okay. You got PMF, now get distribution,
Hmm.
but it's infinitely easier to get distribution if you have PMF.
Right. And how do you guys plan on accomplishing kind of this? Well, I guess first I want to ask you about your kind of current market, which seems to be this kind of like DeFi oriented, crypto native market, people who are already familiar with things like, Pendle and Athena. But do you think that your product will always address this kind of user, or would you like to expand to like a much broader market?
We want to expand much broader. So we're not going to stop continuing to grow in the market that we're in. We think there's a lot of untouched territory here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we're beginning to access it through things like Morpho, things like other tokens, like our partnership with RE, where they've integrated us as their backing. Uh, Drilling down even deeper into the DeFi. Well, I just call them degens, but they're honestly way too smart to be called degens. The guys who are really deep DeFi. So we're continuing our work there, but long term, we want to move into institutional. We want to move into, well, basically taking over the traditional financial world. I want to eat JP Morgan. Um, and I mean, I want to basically take over that entire business.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that? Well, you start out much smaller, much slower. You start out by just getting your foot in TradFi. We're working on that right now. The technology that underpins Infinifi can increase yield on any asset in existence, not just DeFi assets. And so we're putting together a pilot program on some of the tokenized credit stuff that's been coming on chain to show that we can increase the rate of return on it. Once we have that running at a 5 to 10 million, maybe $50 million scale, using on-chain capital, we can then expand outward into bringing in some of those existing LPs in those credit funds from off-chain to on-chain, which is the real core unlock. And now that people see that there's a reason to come on-chain, money starts to flow in, both from that tokenized credit side, and now we start seeing people on the liquid side. I'm already going after the DeFi asset manager types with SIUSD. After that, I want to go after probably the neobanks, um, maybe eventually the credit unions, anyone who's
Mm-hmm.
doing any sort of wealth management and wants a semi-liquid product that has a much better rate than a money market. And we just start sourcing capital kind of across the spectrum. Um, DeFi native institutions at first, flowing into TradFi native small institutions, finally flowing into the real giants. And eventually, I mean, we're a more efficient system than traditional banking, so we eat it.
Mm-hmm. What have been some of the hesitations when talking to these institutional players?
Oh, I mean, the big ones. So they're all for us giving. They're all for selling their products to us. They love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
But most of these guys, and I was at the RWA Summit in New York. You can go watch the speeches there, and you'll hear the same exact thing. They aren't interested in coming on chain in the sense that they're bringing. What they are doing is they are bringing off-chain assets and selling them to an on-chain crowd. They are
Mm-hmm.
not interested in taking on-chain assets and selling them to an off-chain crowd yet.
Right.
We want to change that. That's our goal. But we recognize that, having had some conversations, that the will to do that is contingent upon the provability of that concept on chain. So what we need to do is we need to go out and we need to buy some off-chain assets, bring them to Infinifi, and then after we've shown that this system works and that we are producing a higher rate of return on these assets and operating, 5 to 10 million a scale in this within whatever RWAs we bring in. Well, now we go back off chain and we say, hey, look at this thing. It works. There's money in it. It increases the rate of return on, whatever this asset is. And now, well, I can't predict the future, but based on everything that everyone I've talked to, that's when they start to pay attention. When you can show them, hey, I've got an opportunity here that will make your existing clients more money if they, come on chain and use this product here. And that's the point that we reverse that flow of capital.
From a product perspective, how do you think about that integration? Do you think it will be it will be people actually, downloading crypto wallets and, there will be their bank emails them some link or something? Or do you think it'll be kind of like a more TradFi integrated experience with only kind of the savvy operators actually taking kind of on-chain actions and productizing that for the rest of the world?
I think the latter is far more likely. The status
Mm-hmm.
quo is the status quo because most people are terrified of private keys and don't want to learn about finance and really barely understand. I mean, I'm going to sound like a jerk. Most people don't have a good grasp of, calculus even. So it's not realistic of us to expect them to understand, derivatives or the complexities that lie within this industry. It's
Right.
disingenuous. So I don't think that TradFi is going to remain the way it is, and I don't think the interface to the user will remain the way it is. I think a lot of people will be on board to crypto in our lifetimes. It's kind of like the post office, though. It's going to be around for another generation until the people who started out their lives using it have all died.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely see some of these products being offered in a segregated way. We see some of these products being offered in a total back office black box way. We see crypto apps take the mainstream by force, but at the same time, I honestly still do think the majority of this stuff, majority of these capital flows are going to be coming in through neobanks and other people who are doing the back office work kind of under the hood. And
Right.
so they'll be interfacing with my system, but it's not going to be me writing an app and then, sending that app out into the world. It's going to be them, hooking their own backend into my backend system.
Mm-hmm. Have you guys done any work around this kind of like TradFi integration and understanding exactly what the pain points are from a product perspective for a big kind of wealth manager or something?
So we haven't gotten to that point yet. No, I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
ones I've talked to basically said, hey, you need to build out your proof of concept before I could even
Right.
get this into a meeting without people saying, what?
Mm-hmm.
Because when these guys go, they go with 50 to 100 million at least. And that's pretty small, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to have a certain level of proof with the assets that you want them to run the strategy with before they will consider running the strategy. Hence our what I was discussing about the POC.
Right.
However, I do actually know a decent amount of people in that world, and the pain points are all around custodial wallets and
Mm-hmm.
how do we interface with custodial wallets and how do we make sure that what we're doing in a custodial wallet is safe. How do we underwrite DeFi? How do we underwrite smart contract risk? It's a whole wonderful mixture of issues. Most of them are not wanting to interact with actual Web3 front ends. They'll give it to a developer they have on staff,
Right.
have them write the function calls, or maybe do it through a Gnosis interface. But just look at a large hedge fund and how they're operating. You'll get a pretty good idea of how the TradFi guys are doing it.
So you do think there is kind of still infrastructure to be built out, perhaps like stuff as simple as kind of like, more TradFi friendly interfaces, but also stuff like insurance perhaps, or different, maybe even like research products. There's a whole kind of gamut of products that might be developed on the TradFi side.
To a degree. I wouldn't say TradFi interfaces. It's not the interfaces. It's more that they just don't use interfaces because they don't make
Mm-hmm.
transactions that frequently. Unless
Right.
you're talking about, if you're talking about my world, transactions are not that frequent. If you're talking about, say, like a trader, a totally different game. I don't know that game at all. That's probably still back in because you're talking about HFT algorithms at that point and MEV, and that gets really weird. But to answer your question, I think insurance in this space is very nascent, and I think it needs to be built out further. I think the people who are already building in that space are in an ideal place to do it. I really wish EtherFi and all the other eigenlayer folks would write multiple policies off the same capital. Right now, they've got it so they're only writing a single policy off any capital if they do use it for insurance, and
Mm.
I think that's a bit wasteful. There's some really interesting, like anti-correlated and uncorrelated policies that you could be writing off of that capital, and it would generate quite the return. But we're getting there. This industry is getting there.
I'd like to pivot a tiny bit. You guys are focused on USDC, or I guess USD right now is a better way to put it. Um, you've mentioned the capability of addressing credit markets. Also, sounds like this could be applicable to any asset, really. ETH seems like one that's interesting, obviously, or even like tokenized stocks or something, tokenized equities. Do you guys think about addressing these kind of financial products at all?
Tokenized stocks, tokenized equities, or credit markets? Which one?
I guess
The whole
crypto, well, like more
yeah,
volatile
ETH,
crypto first.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I really like the idea of doing ETH. It's hard. And it's not hard for the reasons that people think it would be hard. It's hard for the reasons that STETH is currently experiencing right now.
Mm.
Because for my system to work, it has to have a bounded duration on the ability to get money out of a certain place. So if I accept ETH and I stake the ETH, I need to know that when I ask for the ETH back, I'll get the ETH back in, say, 30 days. But you can't do that right now. That's not how it works at all. There's no bound on that
Right.
unstaking. There's no guaranteed execution time.
Okay,
It's
so the problem is on the liquid side because the liquid yield wrappers on Steth are not as good as like Aave USDC or something.
well, yeah, you can't just like ask for your money back from EtherFi. They got to get it back from Eigenlayer, and then you got to get it back from STETH.
Right.
And so we could, if I go into one of these ecosystems and try to build something on their back, like EtherFi is great, but I'm not sure if there's enough duration products on the back of the EtherFi even for me to be able to build out the kind of size that I've been able to build out with USDC. Um, because there are so many stable coins that you can mint with USDC that have huge amounts of capital on in their PTs. And it's very easy to move between them, and it scales very well with Pendle and with Athena and with all the other things like Aave, Euler, Morpho, so on and so forth. But it's much harder when you start working with ETH just because it's hard to find a lot of duration products, and the ones that you can find are, they have unbounded durations. Bitcoin's even worse. Bitcoin is probably one of the worst because it just getting good yield on Bitcoin involves going through a prime broker who can lend to you on margin. So that's a KYC activity. And then you got to figure out how to flip that Bitcoin back into various different assets. And it just turns into a headache. It's a very actively managed strategy, finding yield on
Right.
Bitcoin, I would say. So I'd
Yeah.
like to. but they need to develop a bit more, is probably the best way to put it. USDC just has a really well developed market because USDC has a native yield curve and crypto has a premium on it, but we could kind of, look to guidance of that native yield curve. Whereas ETH, it's hard to create a yield curve.
And then generating yield on something like a tokenized equity is kind of similar to Bitcoin, where that kind of infrastructure is just not, or it's not, the
Well, I
curve is
wouldn't
not.
accept it as a deposit, but as an asset for me to deploy capital into, yeah, that's actually really interesting. Same with private credit. The stuff that ACred's been doing, that's neat. Like 9-10%. That's a good yield. I would incorporate that into Infinifi. That
Hmm.
is worthy of my system. Um, Equities are hard because you have to be hedged if you want to hold them, and honestly, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. Um, Same thing with like T-bills. Yeah, it's not that great. But things like private credit are very interesting to me. Funds of
Hmm.
funds, very interesting. Anything delta neutral,
Right. What have been your biggest challenges building out the product?
really. In terms of the product, technically, you mean, or
Sure, I guess technically, and then perhaps kind
no?
of like broad in a broader sense.
So technically, I would say process. You have to we built the product, and that was a very straightforward linear process. Once you get the product out to market, you have to develop processes to keep things moving. You have to develop processes around underwriting. You have to develop processes around deploying new farms. You have to develop processes around rollover events. You have to develop all these processes. And most of them we had ready ahead of launch. Some of them we had to develop on the fly. And it's one of those things where sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and you almost have to build the process while you're flying the plane.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of a good example of this sort of thing. Like adding a new PT and figuring out if you want to get into that PT, you might take some slippage. Okay, well, we accounted for that in our fundamentals. Now, how do we ensure that our execution is optimal? That might be a good
Right.
example. Like, how do we make sure, okay, Pendle's router actually puts you through Kyber, which is a lot less good than Cowsoft. All right, cool. We need to go build a V2 of this farm and get it audited again because everything we launch has an audit. More broadly, hardest part of building a product. I'd say personnel. I'm not like
Hmm.
hiring. I'm good at hiring. I feel quite proud of myself for that. It's more anticipating who you're going to need before you need them.
Right.
The lesson that the advice I've always been given, what I found works well for me is you want to hire for the job that you are doing yourself the most.
Hmm.
Ben Horowitz wrote that. It's a really good piece of advice and hard things about hard things. And anyone who's in my position as a CEO, I highly recommend reading it. A lot of other good stuff in there too, but that's the one that I've found the most useful.
It's interesting too because I find a lot of founders have a problem that they want to work on the most, and I'm sure they're hesitant to give that kind of agency up to someone else.
Yeah, have you ever heard the literary phrase "kill your darlings"?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that, man. I love code. I love development. I'm an engineer by trade. I, I literally had to replace myself. It kills me.
Interesting. So your role has become different and less technical over time.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of what it is being a CEO. Is you have to give up the stuff that you get good at just as you're getting good at it because somebody else is going to be better than you at it. And that's really like the core of what it is to be a CEO. Is you're not trying to become good at any one thing. You're trying to be good at getting good at various different things as they come up, and then find somebody to replace you, and figure out what the next thing you got to get good at is.
Hmm.
So I guess the core is leadership and development. I don't know. I didn't get an MBA or anything like that. I just figured this out as I went.
Perhaps that's the reason too why you see a lot of founders kind of reminisce on the first year, the pre-product days, or like the early grind, because that was when they were most aligned with their work, and then they kind of they were their success caused them to end up in a different lane than they ultimately you know was their kind of core alignment. So, and I see that a lot talking to founders.
I would actually fully agree with that. The pre-product days were, you think they're hard and you think they're complicated, and no, they're not that complicated. Wait until you get it in the air. Not that I would not that I would complain about it. It's infinitely better having been in both situations where you got a failing product and where you got a successful and you just got to keep going, going, going. I will take this every
Mm-hmm.
single day of the week. It's a whole lot better than the struggle. I think it's referred to as
Mm-hmm.
just yeah. But it is simpler before you've launched. I'll agree with that sentiment.
The other thing that I notice interesting about your product in specific, and I feel like there are a lot of current DeFi, or this kind of current generation of DeFi, which I don't know how I would characterize it, feels similar to this, is this idea of you guys or products being more almost akin to like a hedge fund or they're not necessarily just a DeFi primitive or just kind of like a money management tool. It's some kind of like hybrid where you guys are both doing, a lot of research on, Pendle and understanding the yields and optimizing here, but you're also in the process of kind of building out a DeFi primitive and the rails and structure for that as well. So that's kind of, I've seen this a lot in the current DeFi space, and it's an interesting type of company that's never really existed before, in my opinion.
It definitely is. I would say that of all of those, we are the least of them, in that
Hmm.
I really do try to avoid doing things that would make us look like a hedge fund or operate like a hedge fund. We don't run strategies with our assets. We just hold them to maturity. Uh,
Right.
on rare occasions, we'll do lending, but we never run leverage loops on them. We do a decent amount of underwriting, but not too much within the team as much as you might think so. We do technical underwriting. Hey, do they get audits?
Mm-hmm.
Can we make their code work with our system? But the majority of the underwriting we actually outsource to a risk council. We have a bunch of hedge funds, all of whom have buy-in. That is, they've got some capital deployed on us, and we'll go to them and we'll say, hey, have you done diligence on XYZ asset? And if any one of them says yes, and none of them say no, okay, we feel confident. We trust you. We know your diligence process. You applied it to us. So we know you guys are aggressive. And if you're willing to trust your money with these people, we're willing to trust ours. If nobody has done diligence, it's back the line. If anyone says no, it's out. So we get a lot of different eyes on this. We don't It works quite well because most of these people, they would never share their actual diligence packages. They would never like show you what their research reports are, but we're
Mm-hmm.
asking for a binary. So yes or no. And that allows us to get really valuable information, which is, do you trust this thing, from some of the people who are the best at doing this in the industry without having to give
Right.
them anything else. It's a very symbiotic relationship. Um, but yeah, we don't have the kind of control that I think a lot of these hedge fund protocols have. We don't have the
Mm-hmm.
ability to move money cross chain.
Right.
We don't have the ability to just put capital anywhere. We have a time lock on adding any new farm to our system. So it's far more constrained than most of the stuff I've seen out there, where it's just some dude with a Fireblocks wallet or a Fortify wallet, running the whole system. I'm not that. I'm not two guys in a multi-sig. I'm a
Right.
pretty big series of smart contracts and a whole lot of controls that keep me from being able to touch that money.
Mm-hmm. So closer to kind of like a new financial primitive. I do want to ask you about the points program. If I won't, people will be in the comments. But I know that's sometimes delicate. So can you tell me about the design of the points program and what you guys are doing with that?
Yeah. So when we designed the points program, we wanted to take a leaf out of the guys at Athena. They did a really good
Hmm.
job. And the real good thing about their program, I think, is that it doesn't bother with little social incentives. It's very straightforward. You deposit, you get this many points per dollar deposit. Simple, straightforward, easy to run math on, not complicated, not confusing, not off putting. And so we designed a very straightforward and simple point system. You deposit to Infinifi, you're going to get a certain amount of points depending on what you deposited to. It's 1 point per $1,000 per week is the base rate currently. Yeah, it's pretty low points. And you can do different activities like LPing on Pendle, I think is one of the highest earning ones. Or providing dex liquidity, you'll get a higher multiplier on your points, and it's very straightforward and very simple. We did include a secondary program called Bonus Bytes that allows users to do more active tasks to get bonuses. That's kind of our like, hey, we can pull this lever, we can push this lever, see if any of these things actually add a lot of value to the system, and go from there. So far, it's been I would call it a total success. Gotten a lot
Hmm.
of users in there, gotten a lot of people, optimizing, running math on it, and trying to figure out, the secret sauce. If you want to go read DeFi Dojo Steven's threads on it, he's got some good stuff. I will not confirm nor deny anything that he has said, nor will I confirm nor deny anything surrounding tokens. That would that would potentially be of questionable legality. So, but I mean, it's a point system. Draw your own conclusions.
Excellent. Well, we'll leave it there. Um, I want to ask one final question, and that's what it's one I ask founders often. And what's your greatest ambition for Infinify?
I want to change the world. I want to make the world a genuinely better place, and I think that the world is, well, it's not solely broken because of finance, but because finance is captured the way that it is, because it is so centrally controlled by so few people, it has given a very small cadre of the world's elites outsized power and the outsized ability to force people into doing things that they might not want to do. It's basically taken away people's freedom in many, many ways. To me, the original concept of Bitcoin was setting ourselves free from the banking system. And I firmly ascribe to that ideology. It's changed, it's morphed, it's obviously, become a synthesis of different ones. But to me, the original goal here is still the goal. We're going to change the world with crypto. It's not going to be as cut and dried as we originally had hoped, but it's still going to happen. It's still going to be a better place because we've introduced these more efficient, more fair, more meritocratic systems.
Hmm.
And I really want to be my system to be, the one to punch that hole and basically trigger the avalanche.
Excellent. Well, that's a great note to wrap it up on, and a noble vision. Rob, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome chatting about your protocol, and you've got me excited for an optimistic future for DeFi as well. So thanks so much for your time.